Welcome everyone. My name is Phil Zongo. I am the CEO of the Cyber Leadership Institute, and I'm also the best-selling author of 3 books. We founded CLI back in 2018 on the enduring Southern African concept of Ubuntu, which means I am because you are. Ubuntu speaks of our interconnectedness, our selflessness, and respect. And as part of this concept, we run a series which is called Cyber Leaders on the Rise, where we feature extraordinary stories of our members all over the world who are going beyond the call of duty to positively contribute to our important industry. We are joined by my great friend and CLI member, Renaldo, who's the global head of cybersecurity at Globelec, an energy company that is based in Africa. And Renaldo is based in Cape Town, beautiful Cape Town in South Africa as well. So welcome, Renaldo. We're really excited to have you on board.
Good morning. Thank you, Phil. Happy to be here.
Okay, great. So let's get straight into the questions. I am quite privileged because I've worked with you during the cyber leadership program as well as the personal branding. So I know a little bit of your story. I'm pretty curious to learn a bit more about your roots. How was it growing up in Cape Town? And how did your childhood experiences shape the man that you've become today?
Well, thanks, Phil. So I actually grew up in a small town called Ceres, located about an hour's drive outside of Cape Town. And growing up in a town gave me a deep appreciation for resilience, community, and perspective. I was also raised in a post-apartheid South Africa, where access, opportunity, and safety weren't evenly distributed. And that shaped a leadership style grounded in empathy and accountability. My parents were both hardworking and principled. My father was a high school teacher and a deputy principal, and he taught me to lead by example and the value of patience. And my mother, a primary teacher, instilled the values of keeping my guard up and not being wasteful. And so I learned from an early age, and I saw leadership not as a title, but as the ability to make a difference with what you have or where you are.
Amazing. And I think the man that you've become is a great testament of those values instilled at the early age, and credit to your parents for raising you well. Within your family, were you the firstborn? Just a little bit about, you've got siblings growing up?
Sure, no, I'm the youngest of three. I've got two older sisters, so I'm the baby. So yeah, that in its own, and being the only boy, kind of, created a different experience growing up. I kind of had to play with other boys, growing up. But yeah, I mean, part of a good family, good values, well-grounded.
Great. And then towards the turn of, around 1999, I remember your journey very well. You picking up your few belongings and catching a flight to London to begin a new life. Could you take us through that journey? What inspired that, and how did you manage to uproot yourself in South Africa and plant yourself in a completely foreign land?
Yeah, that was for me quite an interesting journey, right? I started out in South Africa, like most in IT. I was still young and very ambitious. I really wanted to, make my own way in life. And so, during my early years of my career, I felt like, I wanted to experience other cultures, other countries. I wanted to go travel and really hone in on my cybersecurity or technical career in a foreign country. And I think the UK at the time was quite accessible. And I decided to pack things up and go and explore and kind of spread my wings. But by relocating to the UK was both exciting and daunting. Personally, I had to navigate the loneliness of leaving a familiar support system. And professionally, I faced the challenge of proving myself in a new market where I didn't have an established network. And at first, I underestimated how much the unspoken cultures and local experience would impact my perception. But I found my footing by leaning into continuous learning. I started volunteering for difficult projects and I started building relationships, one conversation at a time. I also ran into financial difficulties, as I mentioned to you before, and I attended countless interviews, but I believe my determination and perseverance has paid off. I eventually landed my first cybersecurity role, and I think those small wins compounded, and I found not just belonging, but also influence.
Amazing and amazing. And, without taking much of from your story, but I do relate when you say, I said clearly in my book that the first 3.5 years for me here in Australia were tremendously difficult. That constant struggle to belong and the deeply rooted belief that, my odds to succeed here as a young African man were razor thin proved to be one of the hardest time of my life in the diaspora. But I'm also conscious that when I moved here, I was 27 years of age. So I was kind of a man. How old were you when you flew to the UK?
I believe I was around about 22, 23. So
Oh,
quite quite early in my career and kind of just becoming a man, right? So very ambitious. I could felt I could take on the world. So, but it's still a young age, and I think especially in a professional environment and corporate environment in another country, it can be very intimidating at first.
did you manage to integrate yourself into the South African community in the UK? The reason I
UK.
ask is I talk to fellow first generation immigrants here, and the biggest challenge that we face, and I went through this phase as well, is when you are lonely and alone, which is a very bad combination because you don't have community around you. How did you integrate into the community? Was there a big South African population there?
Yeah. So I position myself in London, and there's quite a big, population of South Africans in certain areas. They tend to group together.
Yeah.
So initially, I kind of, established myself with those communities, but I also wanted to experience other cultures, personalities. So I intently kind of broadened my group of friends and circles, with other cultures, with people from other countries, Spain, France, Colombia, and all of those places. And I think that was part of the whole experience of going over is to not just go to another country and kind of meet with fellow countrymen, but kind of expand your network and friendship. And then eventually, right, at some point you do miss your countrymen or even the country. So you naturally gravitate to those communities and then kind of, hang out and form relationships with them.
No, great, great. And I think that's the blessing of youth as well. You were only 22, so
Yeah.
you're quite adaptable. Myself, 27, I had some deep rooted routines and cultures and stuff, and it makes the older the harder, I would say. But so take us back now. You've moved into the UK, and you eventually through your tenacity and hard work, you then break into the industry. Did you get
Mhm.
straight into cybersecurity or you started off in IT? Can you take us through your cybersecurity journey from genesis to the career that you then carved within Europe?
Sure, 100%. So my initial entry into the market was around IT, right? So initially I came fresh from college where I've done a 1 year course on MCSE and Novell at the time, and A plus and N plus. So I landed an internship as a field support engineer, and that was really getting me my hands dirty, going around to different clients and experience of work on IT systems. In the UK, same thing applied. Initially, I got into technical jobs, desktop services, and as I mentioned, through applying to different roles, I was fortunate to land my first cybersecurity position in 2005 at JP Morgan Chase as an identity and access management analyst. And that was really my first exposure to cybersecurity. and in fact at a bank. So, the learning curve, not just from, how the banks operate, but also from a cyber security perspective, was quite steep, right? And I also saw firsthand and what a critical role at the time information security was called plays in the banking system. So I was naturally drawn to this fight of good versus bad. And I also realized that cybersecurity is an emerging profession. And I had the vision at the time of aligning my skills to this growing trend. So I then upskilled myself through self-study. I completed my CISA and CISSP certification in 2007 and 2009, respectively. Keeping in mind that I was probably 27 as well, around about that age. And then those early roles exposed me to both the technical detail of cybersecurity and also the human side of cyber risk. So, together those things with my natural ability to lead, as I would like to believe, naturally pulled me to this leadership role that I'm in now. Because, we know that prevention and response and resilience, it all starts with people. It's not just the tools.
Amazing. And how long did you last in JP Morgan, and what happened after that? Was that your entirety in Europe with JP, or you moved around?
No, so JP Morgan was actually quite good. I mean, I started out as a contractor. I was then made a team lead. There was roughly 20 staff members. I became a team lead of that identity and access management team. Then I was sponsored by JP Morgan for my working visa, so it allowed me to stay longer than my working holiday visa allowed me to do. But then, as we know, in 2008, there was this dreaded credit crunch that shocked the whole world, really, and specifically the banking industry. And unfortunately, they kind of had to retrench myself and the rest of the team and move the operations to other countries. So then it was a difficult time, but I also, again, it presented opportunity. I then moved into a consulting position where I worked at several banks in the Canary Wharf section, and we know there's multiple financial services and banks there. So I really got exposure to retail banking, banks like HSBC, the Swiss bank, Credit Suisse. Eventually, I landed up with Lloyds Banking Group as well, which is one of the largest retail banks in the UK. And in those roles and positions, I performed various functions from security architecture, governance and risk, and disaster recovery. So all of those things really broadened my skill set and knowledge, not just in technology, but across different cultures, across different industries as well. So I think, that was kind of my journey in the UK for that period of time.
Wow, amazing. And after your stint in the UK, what made you decide to go back to South Africa? And when was that?
Right.
So did the timelines as well?
Sure. So I was in the contracting space or consulting space for around about 3 to 4 years. And as you know, eventually I got my citizenship and my British passport. And yeah, I retained my South African nationality as well. I mean, my citizenship at least. So I've got dual citizenship. And at the time, right, I've done all I set out to do in the UK. I've traveled to other countries in Europe and further abroad. I've built a good knowledge around cyber and, my professional career. But then, eventually the longing of going home, because it was still my home in South Africa, my family, my parents obviously aged a little bit, and really just familiar feel of food, sunshine, and friends, right? Those relationships I haven't maintained over a long period of time. So that longing kind of drew me back to South Africa. And I also understood that there's always an opportunity to return to the UK, Europe, when the opportunity presents itself. And that's why I've made the leap to come back to South Africa. And up until today, it's not something that I regret. I mean, here I've built a good career, support system, family, as I mentioned, good food, sunshine. So yeah, it was a good decision at the end.
Amazing. I remember traveling to Cape Town a couple of years ago, and one of the most beautiful places I've ever been to, by a mile. So yeah, I think that was a
Absolutely.
solid decision. And now you moved back to South Africa, and I'm really keen to understand your transition from a functional role into cyber leadership. What is it? How was that transition? How did you land your first ever cyber leadership role? As you know, a lot of our colleagues across the industry, they suffer from what we call the technical ceiling, where they've got all these technical skills. They are superstars in functional roles, but they fail to figure out the formula that's required to break into the leadership space. What was your journey like?
Thanks for that. That's a good question. I think for me, the first thing was really around that shift in mindset, right? So I had to move from being the most knowledgeable technical person in the room to being the most enabling. So I started shifting my focus to my teams by creating opportunities for them, for upskilling them both technically and in organizational skills. And I personally also applied more of a solutions focused coaching instead of being very prescriptive and trying to solve problems for everybody. So I also made a point to build cross-functional relationships within the business, right? By engaging with head of legal, finance, and operations to understand what are their challenges and objectives, what's the type of language they speak, right? Because you have to add value to what they're trying to achieve as well, instead of just the technical focus. So eventually, I wasn't just the cyber guy in the room. I became a trusted advisor to the business. And so my first head of cyber security role came back at the Fashini Group. That was around about 2015, where I stepped into senior management. And at the time, one of the executives said, well, clearly you don't just fix problems for us, you help us to see around the corners. And that only really happened because I stepped out of my comfort zone and I started embracing the broader business context.
Amazing. And just to share a snippet of mine, because I can relate as well, where I think for me it was back in around 2016. So a career in technology risk and audit, but I'm fairly new into cybersecurity, and similar to the view you had in 2005 that cybersecurity was an emerging discipline. I also try to do the same, but I like what you say that you're gonna step out of your comfort zone. I know it comes across as cliched, but I always say that you don't get promoted by executing BAU tasks. For you to
Yeah,
move up, you need to volunteer yourself into difficult situations, and that's pretty much how this works. And
100%.
in that leadership space, yeah, quite surprising actually, because you've been in the game for quite some time. 2015, it's a solid decade. What would be the topmost lesson that you have learned in terms of accelerating transformation? What is the most important lesson that you have learned in the decade you've been in cyber leadership?
Yeah, I think it's important. What I've learned is that you cannot just focus on the technical aspects, right? You have to hone your skill in communication, right? I know it's again cliche, but it's so vital, especially in leadership. It's all around engaging with people, manage their expectations, working with them, establishing those relationships within the business. It becomes a lot less around the technical aspects. Those are still important, but that's where I learned that you have to empower your teams, and place trust in them to do the right thing. If you get sucked into the operations and all the technical detail, you kind of hide yourself behind the scenes and you can't lift your head and be seen. So you really have to go out there, engage with people, learn. As I mentioned, I had to learn the business language, understand business operations, and where cyber or information security can be aligned or add value. And I think also through training and upskilling and even the Cyber Leadership Institute program, that was quite instrumental in my later stage of my career to really elevate me to the next level.
Oh, great. And I think that takes us beautifully to that next question. How did you learn about the Cyber Leadership Institute and what was your journey like?
Yeah, so I came to learn of the CLI through a close friend and a work colleague that was on the course as well. And he, had engagements with you as well. And the feedback was great. And he really kind of, said to me, this is a really great course. There aren't many of these cyber leadership courses out there. The rest of them are quite technically focused. There's not really a differentiation. So, I decided, well, I'm going to take a leap of faith here because I kind of trust this guy and, we've got a good working relationship. And so I signed up for the course, and it was really a game changer. It really gave me a structured way to connect the dots between strategy, influence, and execution. But more importantly, it also connected me with a peer group of diverse leaders from all around the world, really, that were facing similar challenges that I had in different regions and sectors. And I also learned through the program that how to frame cybersecurity as a driver for value. We focus a lot on risk typically, but it's a lot of value that cyber can bring to the party. It also allowed me to, build trust and differentiate the business from a competitive advantage perspective. And we also learned that it's not really just about compliance and risk management. And also, it really helped me to shape my executive presence, right? And gave me the practical tools to lead transformation and not just manage incidents. It also allowed me to understand that I do deserve a seat at the table at an executive level, and that imposter syndrome that's really keeping us back, really. These leaders want to hear from you, they want to understand because you bring value. And I think this program kind of brought all of those things together nicely.
Amazing. And I can tell because I had again the rare privilege of working with you as part of, we gamify cyber strategy development and pitching to the board as part of the 8 week CLP. And I would say 7 years we've run CLI. We have had dozens of cohorts to come through. You were the second person from Africa to win the cyber strategy competition. And again, speaks to your resilience, determination, and just going through the iterative process of getting better. Congratulations on that. Just coming now to, I note that you started making some deliberate move to work and sharpen your personal brand. You already had a brand. You've been in the game for quite some time. Can you explain what inspired that? And also just to join the next question, what advice would you give to a lot of technical professionals who feel like they are underrepresented, they're invisible, or they're just stuck in functional spaces with no leadership visibility?
Yeah, thanks, Phil. And I think, at the time, there was nothing really that differentiated me from the next cyber professional or functional leader. Or, well, not nothing, but I think for me, I wanted to stand out. I wanted to differentiate myself, right? And through our conversations, you were offering the personal branding course, which is really, as the name implies, it's personal, right? And it's customized based on my style of leadership. And then for a long time, really, I have, kind of kept my head down and just focused really on delivering results behind the scenes, as most functional leaders do. But I really reached a point where I realized that, well, if I just stay silent in the background, the narrative around cybersecurity and my personal brand is not going to show. So I came to a point in my career where what got me to this step is not really what's going to get me to the next step, right? So, through the personal branding, we honed in on my writing skills, presentation skills, and really just be present and show up, in boardrooms, presenting with confidence, again, speaking the language that the board wants to hear. And I also really, the next step was to start sharing insights with others, right? I've got a wealth of knowledge over the years, and wasn't really to impress anyone, but it's really to contribute and to connect. And that
Amazing.
shift made a difference for me, right? Opportunities started coming my way. I got invited to advisory boards, to conferences to speak. Recently, I've been talking on podcasts, and through your personal branding, I started writing articles. And
Amazing.
there's more to come in this space, right? So this thought leadership really helped me to stop waiting for a seat at the table, at the executive table, but really helped me to start building my own.
Amazing story, amazing story. And thanks very much. We appreciate your kind feedback. But as we
Sure.
always say that, ultimately credit goes to you, the doer of the deeds, because it's one thing to understand a concept, but real change only comes when you take that decisive first step, which you did very well. And
Mm.
coming to the conclusion of our interview, I've got an important question, which we kind of skipped, but because I know your story, I think this is very important for us to revisit because your career is unlike many. And it's a good testament that the path to the top is not linear at all. So I want to understand because you didn't go to university and then you just carved your path in the woods. I want to understand that. And then, as part of your concluding remarks, what would you say? There's so many people who are facing midlife career crisis. They facing their jobs about to be wiped by AI, and AI is here. They want to transition into cybersecurity. They don't really know what to start. Some of them don't. They don't have academic degrees, and the imposter syndrome keeps holding them back because they don't have this paper. But you managed to create this amazing career across different geographies without taking that traditional path.
100%. And, let's all be honest, education and tertiary education, it's important, right? There's no two ways about it.
Yeah.
There's a lot of value in it from a personal growth perspective, but also landing those really good jobs. But at the time, as I mentioned, I was quite young and ambitious. I really wanted to kind of be on my own, determine my own destiny. And I really didn't feel like, being in university or college for 3 years, studying away, and then really just kind of landing an entry position somewhere else, because the competition was quite big at the time, and it still is, right? And I really wanted to, get my own things, be independent, but also at the time it was a booming time for IT, right? There was a lot of it was again a fairly new sector. We know about Y2K, and that era there was a lot of opportunity. MCSE, CNE, A plus, those things were the talk of the town. So I felt, listen, if I upskill myself here, I can quickly enter the market, and then I'll take it from there, right? So it wasn't a thought out journey, as one would think it is. I had to navigate a lot of obstacles, right? Learning the job, learning how to operate in a high pressure environment. My early roles was quite new, and the learning curve was steep. I had to learn from others. I had to ask questions, but more importantly, I had to go and do my own research as well of how to fix things in IT through trial and error. And again, I had to upskill myself, right? If I see there's an opportunity or there's job roles out there, I kind of studied what are people looking for? What is the skills that organizations find valuable? And I had to kind of upskill myself in that. And I also think that, through interviewing, you're learning, you kind of get denied. You kind of learn through that process. Um, and you kind of adjust. You learn from the mistakes that you've made. You've learned what you could have done better. And I think just keeping at it, not backing down, not saying no, and eventually things will come, towards you. But I mean, advice I can give to others is really, really don't let your invisibility, because that's usually what happens within IT or cyber. Don't let that invisibility convince you that your work is invisible, right?
Mm.
I would say keep showing up, and that's what I've done. Keep delivering with integrity, and with intent, right? The second thing I would say is find and build your tribe. Okay, the right network can validate you, it can stretch you, and it can open doors. Especially now in my career, this is very important. I'm part of a great community of cyber leaders and professionals down in Cape Town and in South Africa. I would also say, thirdly, ask for what you want. Okay, there's a saying that clarity breeds confidence, right? So, if leadership is your goal, let that be known from the start, right? And acting like the leader you want to be. Okay, show initiative and get involved. That was the other thing. I went to managers. I said, listen, I've got a interest in a certain topic, whether it's leadership, business, or even general IT or cyber. Show an interest, bring up fresh ideas, right? So now I've really turned my attention to start developing others locally, to become future leaders. I'm more intentional about it, and I also apply more of a personal, not a fixed approach of how to train or coach other leaders. And then finally, I would say own your difference, right? What makes you underrepresented might also be your unique advantage,
Mm.
right? And the future of cyber leaders depends on diverse voices, and your voice is needed.
Wow. What an incredible story, my friends. And we are full of gratitude because I know for sure that you're carving out your busy schedule to share your journey with our growing community and inspire. We exist for two things. Number one is to inspire people to believe beyond their self imposed mental limitations and to crush that mental ceiling, which you did beautifully, and also to offer actionable insight for them to accelerate their careers. And if there's one lesson that I got from your journey, is you reminded me of one of my best books, which is Who Moved My Cheese, which means the dial is always moving. When you started off back in
Yeah.
2000, early 2000s, I remember vividly we had a handful of Microsoft certified systems engineers in Zimbabwe, and people literally worshipped them. They were like gods of IT. And when I did my certified information systems auditor exam in 2004, we were less than a dozen of us again. But as time goes on, the cheese is always moving. So I like
Yeah.
your story of reinvention, of stepping out of your comfort zone, of stretching yourself, and most importantly, going down the stairs and try to help others trying to overcome the same obstacles that you were
Correct.
blessed enough to overcome. So thank you very much. We appreciate your time and hope you have a beautiful time in a beautiful day in Cape Town.
I appreciate that very much. Thanks, Phil. I really enjoyed the session, eh? Keep well,
Amazing.
my friend.
Thank you.